Everyone can hear me, correct? Great, now we can. My name is Nierenberg. I am president and co-founder of Food Tank along with Bernard Pollock. Really thrilled to be here to have a discussion on how financial mechanisms, pricing, and subsidy strategies can transform food systems to meet climate goals. That's a mouthful, right? But we have a great group of panelists to discuss this. I'm going to introduce them briefly, and then we'll just go into conversation and have a lot of dialogue, and I hope Q&A from the audience. So please join me in welcoming Megan Waters, a senior policy officer at the Farm Animal Investment Risk and Return organization. Round of applause for Megan, please. Joining us virtually, we have Jeroom Remmers, the director of the True Animal Protein Price Coalition, or TAPP. Can we see him? Jeroom, are you here? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome, my friend.
I'm here.
Thank you. We also have Zitouni Ould-Dada, the Deputy Director of the Food and Agriculture Organization. And sitting next to me is Jarl joining us on this panel. Thank you, Jarl. I'm so sorry. It's my fault, Jarl. You just asked me.
Don't worry.
Right next to me, we have Ambassador Ertharin of the Food Systems for the Future, and Jarl Krausings, the Deputy CEO and International Director of CONCITO. So give them a huge round of applause, please, before we move on. Bigger. It's at the end of the day, everyone. I know we're all tired. So thank you all for being here. Zitouni, I want to start with you because last year there was really exciting news when the FAO announced that it would release its roadmap. You know, the energy sector has had a roadmap for a long time. We haven't had the same sort of transition pathway for the agriculture sector. This will be released, the first part tomorrow is my understanding, and I was wondering if you had any way to give us a sneak peek or what you're most excited about.
Okay, no, thank you very much and good afternoon. I hope there will be some presentation of a roadmap or maybe elements of that roadmap. But perhaps just to explain some background, because maybe not everyone is familiar with what we're talking about and why is it important. Basically, everyone understands by now that we need to transform the agri-food systems. They need to be more efficient, more sustainable, more inclusive, so that everyone benefits from food. So we feed and nourish people and a growing population. And also systems that are resilient, because agri-food systems, they are not resilient to climate change at all. They were not resilient to COVID-19. So we've seen so many disruptions. And everyone involved in this process, and coming from different perspectives, everyone says we need to tackle this aspect of the food systems. We need to tackle the healthy diet. We need to tackle the methane emissions. We need to tackle the use of energy on farm. We need to tackle or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We need to build adaptation and resilience, etc. So the idea was to bring these key pathways in one picture that everyone can look at and say, we know where to go in transforming the agri-food systems. These are key pathways. And what the policymakers need to do, and where investors need to see opportunities to invest in innovation, in technology, and where also consumers can see what needs to be done with regard to promoting healthy diet, and really establishing that critical link between food, people, and nature. This is really the key thing we want to see. And the idea was for that to be the first picture for everyone to look at and have that clarity of where we want the world to go. And then from there, we can start diving deeper into more specific areas. Why? Because this agriculture sector is very complex, very complicated. It's different from country to country, even between countries is different. Therefore, the first thing to do is to have the overall picture and then start dealing even with regional roadmaps. That's what the idea. I don't know yet what is going to be presented tomorrow. I hope there will be something useful. But in any case, and just finish with this, in any case, I think this is really an exciting start of everyone who cares and passionate about food and agriculture actually to start working together and see some change happening. That's the key thing. The declaration is a strong political signal. We can build on it and all actually have something to bring to this space. So a roadmap or not roadmap, the main thing is this is a start of an exciting journey that we will have something to bring to it.
Thank you, Zitouni. Ertharin, you and many others have been on this journey that Zitouni described for a long time in terms of trying to transition investment towards food and agriculture systems for that resilience that we need, whether it's a pandemic or the climate crisis or public health shocks. Can you talk about what kinds of investments that are most needed and where they are most needed?
All of it, and across the entire system, whether we're talking on the humanitarian side, you're seeing WFP now having 50% less resources than they've had in the past, or we're talking about the food systems transformation, supporting the access to the private sector capital that's required, because we know while everyone talks about the $600 to $700 million in public subsidies and reprogramming those subsidies to support a more regenerative food systems, we have not seen that capital move.
Right.
We also know that private sector capital, climate finance money has not flowed into the food system. We have 4.8% of the climate finance that is now that now flows to the food system. And so the work that we've been doing, I see Gunhild here and Geeta from the Good Food Finance Network, was a outcome of the UN Food Systems Summit to bring together leaders from across the advocacy community as well as from the bank and from UNEP and the World Business Council on Sustainable Development to say, how do we unlock the different pots of capital and the different pillars, and I'm sure on your second panel they'll speak more about those pillars, but what we at FSF focused on was how could we engage more private sector capital. And looking at the capital stacks that are necessary in order to move private capital from places where it flows today to places where it has not considered flowing in the past. When we did the landscape with asset managers and owners about private sector capital flowing into agriculture in Africa, the first response I would always get, well, you know, Africa is quite risky. And I said, well, you know, Africa is 54 countries. And each of the countries have different risk levels. And you cannot point to the entire continent and say investing in Nigeria is the same as investing in Central African Republic. And I'm not going to pick on any one country here, but we know we need different types of capital to flow to different places. So we made a breakthrough in the last couple of days where we've had asset managers and owners saying the first priority should be creating a cost-effective MRV system. The bank has been working on creating an MRV system for agriculture, and now how do we make that open source in a way that you can build on it to support the measurement, reporting, and verification that is required to actually move climate capital to show that because you can measure the impact that regenerative agriculture, sustainable livestock management, new warehousing, et cetera, have on the reduction in greenhouse gases. And so that was the first step, that we actually got them to say, if you can build this tool, there's a possibility. So I'll stop there, but just to say that we're trying to learn the lessons from the energy community in the private sector. What did, to avoid the challenges of long discussions before we can actually begin to create the tools that will unlock capital. But it is essential that we unlock the capital that is necessary for food systems transformation, as well as the capital that is required for humanitarian response.
And I love that you linked those two things together because they cannot be separated.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you, throughout your career, made them very linked?
Well, I will first of all say we have 146 countries that have now signed on to the UAE Food Systems Declaration. The countries that have not signed on are primarily G77 countries. And the reason why is because they are focused on food security and nutrition and addressing the challenges, the humanitarian challenges and the debt challenges that they have, and they do not want to subsume that into greenhouse gas emissions, particularly when they feel like we didn't do this. And so now, if we have capital, we should focus on the greenhouse gas emissions and not the food security. When you have 3.1 billion people who can't afford a diverse and nutritious diet and some 800+ million people who are undernourished, we must build a narrative that says that you can reduce greenhouse gases and support the access to nutritious food and support the emergency food system. We don't have the luxury of just focusing on an efficient reduction of greenhouse gases without also talking about food security, nutrition security, and meeting humanitarian needs.
Absolutely, thank you. It's not either or. Ertharin, I know you need to run to another event,
apologize.
but thank you so much for your remarks and for being
I'm
here.
so excited that we are having these conversations. Let me just say, when we were at, I want to say two things that are really important here. One, when we were at COP26, you all will remember, because we're the same people, I'm looking at you, we stood on the tables because there was no food day. And then we went to COP27 because we got a food day. But then when the final declaration came out, they mentioned agriculture once, and they mentioned food security once, and food systems not at all. So we all did letters, and so now the COP28, Miriam and the team said, we're going to make it at the center. The conversations have been robust around what is necessary. The commitments have been real. I still worry, and we all need to be mindful of this, that the negotiations now, they still have not gotten to the language that is necessary to support the food systems transformation. Because if everyone doesn't agree, no one agrees. And so we need to use as much energy in those rooms over there as we use in these rooms over the next 2 days.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Round of applause for Ertharin, please. Thank you, Ertharin. I feel like there are a lot of different people in the room since COP26. But, thank you.
There are a lot of familiar faces out here. Come on now. How many of you all were at COP26? How many of you were at COP27? See?
You're right. You're right. You're always right, Ertharin. Thank you so much. Megan, I want to turn to you because one of the reasons that the FAO decided to do this global roadmap was because of the involvement and sort of pressure, insistence, if you will, of organizations like FAIRR. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that process and why you felt it was so necessary to have these roadmaps in place.
Absolutely. So hi, I'm Megan, and unlike some of the people who've spoken before me, my organization might not be as well known. So I'll just take half a second to say that I work for the FAIRR initiative. And what we do is we're a $70 trillion investor network. It's an NGO, and it was founded as a philanthropic activity in which, by an investor, basically with a view that really careful risk and opportunity analysis needed to be happening at a much more robust level for the agricultural, the food sector. And so looking straight from food through animal agriculture, looking at this full stream of impacts, also looking at some of the alternative proteins. And so in each case, the kind of in-depth risk analysis that's often done in financial houses was being applied in a new way to protein producers. And so each year we publish an index of 60 of the biggest producers, and we really are looking for who's making some of the adaptions, who's making diversification, which people, because of where they're located or policies they're choosing, are at greatest risk to the investment because of the negative externalities and perhaps not addressing them sufficiently, or because of the policy environment in which they work. So that's the quick backdrop. And then to say, within our memberships, all members receive our different publications and use them as they're making their investment decisions. Well, I can't promise they all do, but I think many of them do. And then what we do is sometimes investor members will say, here's some critical issues that we feel are making it difficult for us to invest in a meaningful way, in a confident way, in sustainable agriculture, or just even in this sector as a whole. So just want to touch on quickly two investor action letters that we wrote. One was last year. It was about investors with about $18 trillion of assets under management wrote and said, listen, would really help guide us and give us guideposts and a vision of where things are going if the FAO would put together a roadmap of what would be needed to get to 1.5. And so we submitted the letter and had a lot of interactions, and there was receptivity to that being a good idea. And so tomorrow we'll get the first piece of something which I think is important to acknowledge will be a 3-year process. But the fact that that is so important to investors is not something people immediately think of. And secondly, I'll just mention that another one we've done recently that comes up both in what Ertharin just said and otherwise is that we've just this past May had an initiative on the G20 nations looking at agricultural subsidies. And basically where you have agricultural subsidies that are not particularly well aligned with where we need to go, that is a hindrance to progress, and identifying that. And just recently, the World Bank came up with a paper called Detoxing Development, and we're looking at environmentally harmful subsidies. And they concluded that every year, 14% of annual deforestation across the world comes as a direct result of agricultural subsidies. So that's all of our tax-paying money, and it's all going, much of it goes in good directions, but a lot of it goes to sustaining situations which are more extractive and not compatible with reaching our Paris commitments, not compatible with 1.5, but also not compatible with feeding the world. And I would add one more thing that sometimes gets overlooked at COP, which is the biodiversity and nature piece. That if we come up with solutions to deal with greenhouse gases that take too heavy a consequence on nature, we will also find ourselves in an uninhabitable planet. And antibiotic resistance is another issue. The business of a great deal of antibiotics going into the livestock sector and how that has human health knock-on. So it's a full picture on how to create just and equitable food system so everyone on the planet has enough to eat, healthy food to eat, security in eating it without destroying our home.
Thank you, Megan. A lot to unpack here, and maybe I can bring Jeroom into the discussion too, to talk about, with the new report coming out, and this is a 3-year sort of study of transition pathways for food and agriculture, the other data sets that you mentioned from the World Bank and others. How do you expect the finance community to change and respond?
So other than the ones who are members who are excited and keyed up, yeah? I think there's several ways, and again, I don't want to speak too much, but I'll give a quick answer to it and you can kind of come back. A big piece of this is a question of de-risking. So if you're going to be asking people to put money into something, the primary goal of an investor is to see returns on their money. And so some of the ways, there's been a recent US and Nordic kind of investment mobilization agreement. Those sort of mechanisms are really great. A government gets in first, does a bit of that. People say, and just as Ertharin was saying, Africa is risky. Even just say Kenya's risky is crazy, because there's all sorts of different crops being grown in different places and by different companies, and each of those things deserves to be looked at individually and properly. But as you find that those investments that are made by governments coming first, some of them bring nice returns, it makes it a safer, more comfortable place for investors. I think the same thing is true with some of the foundations are starting on purpose to give loans, a lower rate loan. I mean, in theory, that's also kind of what the World Bank, does. So this business to create a safe pathway, I think also creating a roadmap is very helpful. I think that governments individually setting some frameworks and setting rules of the road so that you have an even playing field.
Sure.
That makes a very big difference. And I guess the one other one I would say is that some of the very big companies that are in our index, or if they're not in our index, they're in other analyses of ours, like a Nestle and so forth. Some of these companies have made really impressive commitments on regenerative agriculture. Well, if you're going to be tracing back and making sure that crops are grown in the right way, and you're as big as Nestle, so you buy an awful lot of the ingredients that become chocolate and coffee, then you're dealing with a lot of smallholder situations in many different countries. And I think what you are going to begin to see there to make that really fly is going to have to be some micro finance, and that microfinance itself is going to serve as what I would call catalytic capital, which is what all these things I've just been describing, and all of them just de-risk a little bit for the private sector.
Yeah, that catalytic arm of this is so crucial. Jeroom, I don't know if you can hear us, but I'd love to bring you into the conversation. I can't see you. There you are, Jeroom.
Yes, I'm here, Danny, and so my name is Jeroom Remmers from the True Animal Protein Price Coalition, which is a coalition of many food companies and NGOs, mainly in Europe, but also in the States. We promote the true pricing or the greenhouse gas emission taxation on food, especially meat and dairy, because meat and dairy in the world are causing almost 20% of greenhouse gas emissions. According to a FAO report, it was 14.5%, but this was, I think, 6 years ago, and it's increasing fast. So we need to do something to reduce it, but those kind of emissions are for meat and dairy every year. So the best thing we can do, according to our organization, is take and emission schemes for high-income countries to reduce those kinds of outcomes.
Jeroom,
And we are
unfortunately,
very happy that during this climate conference, it considered this as a good thing.
great, Jeroom. You were cutting out a little bit for us. You're cutting out a little bit for us. So
Sorry?
You're cutting out a little bit for us. So I just want to make sure that I can give you a chance to answer a question in case we lose you. In terms of, you've talked about the true cost of meat and dairy and other livestock products. I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of the challenges that agricultural subsidies present when we're talking about these things, because these are commodities that are subsidized heavily, especially in the global north.
Yes, we heard from FAIRR that this kind of harmful subsidies are a problem. Subsidies to farmers, for instance, for dairy farmers and meat producers, they encourage farmers to produce more meat and dairy, while we need less of it. So subsidies can be good. We promote subsidies for farmers, but to do the right thing. So to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to have carbon farming, for instance, or to shift to organic dairy, that kind of things, or plant trees. So we need subsidies for farmers, but different kinds of subsidies. And this kind of new subsidies can be paid from taxation on meat and dairy or ETS systems in the agri-food sector. In Europe, the EU Commission recently published a report on an ETS system for greenhouse gas emissions from the agriculture food sector. And dairy factories and slaughterhouses are the ones most likely to be part of that system. And many countries like Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, New Zealand already plan taxes on meat or for livestock farmers to reduce their emissions.
Thank you so much, Jeroom. I want to bring Jarl into the conversation to talk about what is happening in Denmark with those climate tariffs and carbon pricing.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me on the panel. Basically, I should say maybe I come from a think tank that works both on the production system, but also on the shifting diets, and all of the pieces are into the discussions right now. It's great we're going to have a global roadmap coming out tomorrow. I think it's great. What we are looking for in Denmark would actually also have been at a national level, a kind of a global or a national roadmap that would address both the reduction side and the shifting diets, and comparing it up against, the nature protection and biodiversity conservation, etc. But what we are seeing is actually, from the government side, a kind of a hands-off on the shifting diet, because it's too, you come there, you point your fingers and say you cannot eat meat. And that's not a message that politicians are very happy to bring out to the citizens. But what is much easier for them is exactly to work on the industry itself. And that's what we actually see right now. an extremely interesting but also very intense phase in terms of putting a price or a carbon price into the agricultural system, or tariffs, I should say, carbon tariffs. They've had expert committees working on this over the last 3 years. We are very close to having a proposal most expectedly put on the table within the next few months. The big problem is where do you place the tariffs? And we are talking about a sector with a lot of biological processes. Some of these gases very unpredictable as to where, under which conditions are they emitting how much, etc. And we do not have a system in place, or the government does not have a system in place where you can actually measure this at the farm level. You simply don't have it. So even if we wanted to introduce right now a farm level kind of tariff system, you would not be able to do it. The expectation is it will take another 5 to 7 years until you will actually have sufficiently strong numbers to be able to do that. So one proposal that is there on the table, but which has not been picked up, is instead, could one look at certain points of emissions that we can actually measure? For instance, we know the number of cattle that you have in the industry. You know also how much fertilizer that is being put out now. You know how much animal manure that is being produced, and you know more or less, but much more difficult, how much peatland you have in the country. So can you instead imply or put certain tariffs on these points of emissions rather than actually going to the farm level? That's one of the models that is being considered. Then there's the discussion, should it at all be at the farm level?
Right.
Should it be at the production level, in the industry, much higher up in value chain? So all of these discussions are very intense and going on now. The background is the government has set a very ambitious climate target, 70% emission reduction by 2030. And a net zero by 45, and minus 110 by 2050. And there's no chance that you will reach these figures without immediate deep interventions or contribution from the agricultural sector. Already now, there is a political agreement with the industry that we are going to aim for 55 to 65% emission reductions in the ag sector by 2030. But if you look historically, the sector has produced 20% emission reduction since 1990,
Right.
and nothing has happened over the last 15 years. And there's many good reasons why it's politically extremely difficult to step into that space.
Sure.
It's about people, it's about nature, it's about a nurture.
It's about a culture.
It's about culture. So if you do not can find that narrative where you can speak with the affected people about what's going to happen with their farm and what's the alternative, or what are the wins in terms of actually pushing the transformation. You risk running into a European context in a yellow vest kind of a situation, and that is the biggest fear for any political
Sure.
stakeholder in this business.
If there's not a plan for a just transition, there will be a revolution instead.
That's it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jarl. I really appreciate that. Zitouni, this year's FAO State of Food and Agriculture report looked at true cost accounting in the food system, and that's basically what we're talking about here, the externalities of livestock and dairy production, and how that affects the environment, how that affects human health, how that affects the climate crisis. And I'm wondering if you, from your perspective, can explain why true cost accounting is such a powerful tool for helping sort of level the playing field, get us all on the same page so that we don't have these sort of really intense conversations where people are blamed and villainized, but that we can all sort of look at what's happening in a way that is conducive to finding solutions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Often we talk about the cost of food in terms of economic cost, but there's so many hidden costs. In fact, we did a report just recently that looks at these hidden costs in terms of health, social, and environmental. So when we go and do our shopping and say spend $50 in a basket of food, and we pay that amount of money for that food. But then it depends what kind of food we have. As you know, if you use a lot of processed food, you might have some health issues, you might put on weight, you might have cardiovascular diseases, God forbid, but it's that kind of impact that we don't think about much. How much that cost to the health services in countries. And then also the environment where this food was grown, how much water was used, the impacts on biodiversity, all these aspects. And the social impact as well in terms of malnutrition, poverty in some part of the world. This is particularly in developing countries. These are the impact, the hidden costs that we tend to see. So overall, we're talking about globally, these hidden costs, they amount to around 10% of the global GDP. So it's massive, but we don't, talk about them much, but it's important that we become aware of these hidden costs. Why? Because we're talking about this transformation and the things we want to change, but we need to be aware of the various factors that are involved in this transformation we want to make. Basically, there is so much that needs to be changed in these systems. So the hidden costs, why they're important, because even for policymakers, and we're talking about subsidies in some aspect of the food systems, because they're not subsidies everywhere. Smallholder farmers don't get any subsidies. That's another part that we should not forget about. But this in terms of policy making, that you have a big picture of what's going on in these systems, then you need data, of course, to be able to say, where these costs are more prevailing and what needs to be done about it. So this is just a start. This is the first report that looks into these hidden costs, and it emphasizes the fact that that we do have a lot of contradictions in this sector. We have hunger, we have obesity, we have greenhouse gas emissions, and we have decline in biodiversity, in addition to a massive use of water. So this is the usefulness for policymakers in particular, and for awareness raising amongst consumers.
Absolutely, and it's also useful for investors. So I'm going to bring Megan and Jeroom back into the conversation. And Zitouni described some of the things that are included in the true cost accounting sort of framework. What is missing for you all when you're trying to explain the true cost of food to investors and to others?
Well, I think that the true cost of food issue, when we frame it and break it out differently, but what we're looking at is material risks, yeah? And then a big part of this, and I've heard throughout the week, quite a few investors, as well as those from FAIRR, and as well as our membership and our staff who've been around, is that there's actually capital and policy need to go together. And so if we're creating some frameworks where we say, well, actually, if I were running a business and someone said to me, hey, here's the thing, is that of the total money altogether from the planet, your business is taxing all of us 10%, because that's basically what it means, is to have 10% of global GDP each year being costs from this sector. I think as investors, as business people, they would say, well, that doesn't seem like a particularly good model. And they would say, eventually, am I going to get in trouble for that? Like, I'm asking someone else to carry on these costs.
Right.
And you see examples of it, tobacco and other things, where at some point you pointed to a human health cost, and there were some regulations, and you have some egregious things that happen environmentally, and then various countries put laws in place. So those things create some guardrails, and I think that when you look at the true cost accounting report that came out from the FAO, it's quite compelling. Yesterday there was a good report from the UN Environmental Program, and tomorrow will be the first of what will hopefully be a strengthening and more detailed and robust roadmap exercise. So all of these things, and then it really does come down to the pledge made by all the countries, and it's now 146, which is fantastic, on the food pledge at the beginning of this week. Eventually, between what's happening with the roadmap and what's happening with that, those two things are going to dovetail.
Sure.
I think some people we know are going to speak about that tomorrow morning. And I think that then that comes down to actual national plans. And once nations make plans and they begin to say, well, in order to achieve this, I'm going to have to shift these rules and laws. Well, that makes it easier for investor to have confidence in the rules that they're playing within and a level playing field. So I would say that that's a particularly important way it helps.
Thank you so much, Megan. Jeroom, do you want to comment?
Sure. I really worried about the hidden cost of our food systems, because this is a reason for environmental and health taxation on food products. This can reduce those externalities. And we know that a lot of G70 countries, including Congo and Uganda, are asking high-income countries now to start taxation on meat or ETS systems for the food sector that generate income also for the loss and damage fund. So we think we support those countries. They have real problems with the causes, the consequences of meat overconsumption in rich countries. So they ask to the rich countries and also to China, reduce your meat consumption. Otherwise, we will never realize the Paris climate goals. And this letter will be sent tomorrow to OECD country ministers, and the low-income countries, they also say we will not sign any COP agreement anymore if rich countries and China will not target meat consumption reduction and taxation on those kind of products. So that's the state of play at this moment right now. And so we have a lot of CO2 taxation mechanisms in rich countries for the energy sector. It really works well. You can use those tax revenues to subsidize sustainable energy, and you can do the same in food and agriculture systems. Taxation is really needed, and it's already supported by a majority of consumers in Western Europe countries. On the condition that tax revenues are used to pay farmers to do the right things and to compensate low-income groups. So they want also to eat meat and will not be harmed disproportionately. And you can also reduce taxes and prices of vegetables and fruits and plant-based meat and dairy. So this would be my recommendations for the rich countries and China to make announcements to have this kind of systems in the future and really help the greenhouse gas emissions from the sector to go down, together with regulations, of course, and communication why this is needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeroom. Such great points. I want to turn to Jarl now because we're talking about a lot about country-level commitments, but what excites me is what's happening at the municipal level, and I'm hoping you can talk about that in more detail.
No, definitely. As part of the push to create all change in the food system, I mentioned before that there's not been enough emphasis on how do you actually shift diets. There's been a lot of push for the government to actually go into that arena. The municipalities themselves, however, they're not waiting. They're actually closer to the citizens. They want to be re-elected, these mayors, and they're much more, I would say, recipient to that transformative change also on the diet side. So what we've seen right now is approximately half of the Danish municipalities, they're now moving ahead, putting up rules in terms of public procurement on how they are going to build a much more net zero or sustainable food system in public cafeteria, homes for the elders, the schools, etc. And several municipalities already now have either banned red meat in public cafeterias, or they're putting in place shadow pricing for how the cafeterias themselves actually can manage their own carbon footprint in total. Some places it happens in such a way that given a dollar budget and a carbon budget. And then they have to comply, basically do what you can, but you're not going to get more than what you have now. So other places, they're also being benefited. The less red meat they actually, introduce in the schools, they get a premium in terms of not doing that. Of course, it creates a lot of discussions and so on. The big challenge here is the issue around data. You need to, calculate the carbon footprint of all kinds of these food products. And there are many different standards out there from all kinds of sources. We are also producing, a standard for ourselves. We're looking very much at what the E Foundation and others have produced as well. But the municipalities, in order to have comparability in terms of what is being attempted to be done from the municipalities, you need a standardized set or a standardized method on how you actually to do that. And that's just one of the the complicated issues that you need to address.
Absolutely. I feel like it's all coming back to data. We only have a few minutes left for this part of the panel before I'll turn it over to Holly Freishtat from Feeding Change at the Milken Institute. I want a call to action from each of you. I'm going to start with Jeroom since he's online. What's your call to action in 30 seconds or less, Jeroom, for the last few days of COP28?
Yes, my call to action is mainly to high-income countries to really
We've sadly lost Jeroom's audio. I'm sure it was great, though. I'm sure it was a really powerful call to action, and hopefully we can hear it later. Megan.
Well, that's an awfully tough question. I guess very quickly, what I would say is a couple of things. One is very hard. This is an incredibly difficult political issue. It's difficult in every single country. There's the feeling of needing to protect your farmers. It's important for voters, for rural voters. Most countries hold a very deep psychological place for their farmers, regardless of them being a smaller share of the population, because in things like COVID, you want to know you can produce your own food. So there absolutely has to be a plan for just transition of bringing the producers along, and there has to be a plan for just transition for all of the people, particularly in the global north, who've grown very used to and very attached to their hamburgers and their steaks. So there need to be really tasty alternative proteins and other ways to help make that transition a comfortable one. And so I think that the biggest challenges are narratives around that. It's about the team building and the reaching out and making sure that people understand who are in these sectors that there will be a way to continue to make money while simultaneously
Thank you, Megan.
saving the world.
Thank you so much. Zitouni.
For me, is to translate these commitments we've seen at this COP, the energy that we built up to now, into something meaningful on the ground that countries, farmers, and people can benefit from.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being succinct. Jarl, you get the last word, my friend.
It would definitely get rid of the harmful subsidies. That must be the first step, and redirect that finance to, but in a way where you actually reach all the way down to the household level. And I think that's the issue with much of the innovative finance we have in the ag sector, that actually, it has a ticket size which is big, and how do we actually get to household? Microfinance is probably an area that hasn't been exploited enough in order to also make it possible for farmers to, get new skills, new products to work with. I think that's a huge risk if we don't remember that part of the chain.
Thank you all so much. That was wonderful calls to action. Please give the panel a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Holly Freishtat. I'm the Senior Director for Feeding Change at the Milken Institute. And Feeding Change sits at the intersection of finance and food systems. And we use social and financial capital to create a more sustainable, resilient, equitable, and nutritious food system. So it is wonderful to be here today. And really, this panel is a continuation of the panel before. We did not think it would be appropriate to put 8 people on a panel, so we divided up into 2 groups, but the conversation will continue. And the reason we need to continue in 2 panels is there's many different perspectives and many different solutions of how we're going to create a more cooperative financing for a healthy, climate, resilient, inclusive food system. So the main thing I want to start off with is we need to shift and accelerate mainstream financing And the way that we're going to be doing this is through cooperative financing. We know that partnerships are absolutely essential to seeing the scale and the shift that we need at this urgent moment in time. So I want to start with introducing my panel today. And I have Dr. Gunhild Stordalen, is the founder and executive chair of EAT. I have Geeta Sethi, serves as the advisor and global lead for food systems at the World Bank. And at the end, I have Hamid Hamirani, is a senior advisor to Food Systems for the Future and the lead for the Good Food Finance Network public finance lead, excuse me. So we're going to start with, we've heard some overview, but each one of us on the panel here has a different perspective. So I'm going to start with you, Gunhild. And I want you to start with giving us a brief overview of why EAT exists and what the framework is of the scientific evidence and sort of the justification for this work. And then I'll have you extend into like the reason for the Good Food Financing Network.
Thank you so much, Holly, and great to be here. So EAT was funded in 2013 on a big question. How do we feed, or is it even possible to feed a growing world population enough healthy food within planetary boundaries? And obviously we keep talking about the climate boundary, but there are 8 out of 9 physical limits or guardrails that food touches up on. And if we transgress one of them, we are still not doing well. So that question had no scientific answer when we started, and there was no arena bringing all the stakeholders from the farmers to policymakers, business, investors, the civil society together to co-create solutions and find ways to scale these solutions based on the science. And now, 10 years down, I mean, it's fantastic to be here. Finally, food systems has reached a global agenda and is now recognized as a key solution to both climate mitigation, but as importantly to adaptation. So since the science wasn't there, we joined forces with The Lancet, one of the world's leading medical journals, and we invited different experts from health, nutrition, agricultural policy, earth system science, etc., etc. And 37 scientists tried to answer this question: what is an optimal healthy reference diet? And is it possible that 10 billion people eat this healthy reference diet to be able to do the math within planetary boundaries? And the good news is that it concluded that it is indeed possible, but it will require a radical transformation of the way we produce, how much we waste and lose, and obviously what we eat. So the challenge is immense, but at the same time, food offers a very powerful entry point to transform a complex, dysfunctional system, because there are so many allies that you can bring to the table and building these multi-stakeholder coalitions. But part of the problem that we are still grappling with is that we don't have any set of a 1.5 degree equivalent set of targets for food. We don't agree. We don't agree what is a healthy diet. We don't agree on what are the guardrails that food systems transformation have to happen within. So now we have set up Eat Lancet 2, launched it last year or kicked it off with higher ambitions. We have now over 50 scientists from universities around the world, equally Global South, Global North representation. They are adding 2 new planetary boundaries, novel entities, which is about pesticides, plastic, GMO, antibiotics, and ocean acidification, which is also highly relevant for the food system, and is building the first food model into comparison project, so building an IPCC model for food. So that will add to the 1.5 roadmap that FAO talked about, and be the best reference point. How do we get it right for food, and importantly, bringing in the social justice and equity dimension. And the first panel talked about the need for steep reduction in meat consumption and animal proteins in Global North, also to allow Global South to actually increase their consumption. And this will point out that social equity dimension in a much stronger way. And then one other knowledge product that is worth mentioning in this context is the Food Systems Economics Commission. the true cost accounting study that FAO spoke to has actually been using part of the modeling. This is a study that the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, the Food and Land Use Coalition, and EAT have commissioned together. It's launching its global policy report in end of January next year. And the ask was basically to do a Stern report for food based on an Eat Lancet 1 scenario. And the economists and experts on this commission has assessed the cost of inaction versus the cost of action or transitioning to a scenario in a just, equitable way. And the good news is that even this commission is concluding that it is possible. It's going to be really difficult, and we need, again, these multi-stakeholder coalitions to overcome not at least the vested interests, all those benefiting from status quo, the massive power imbalance in the value chain. But we can unleash a huge economic and socioeconomic benefits, and it's all really about massive healthcare budget savings, and it's about reducing climate's environmental damage, and it's also about creating opportunities, jobs, etc., etc. So that report is worth looking into when it comes out, and it will add further to the evidence, and not at least for governments. Right now, no one is seeing all the actual costs in one spreadsheet. It's across different ministries, different departments. We have operated way too long in silos, and we haven't actually brought in that multi-dimensional way of measuring success when it comes to food. It's a massive challenge, but it's also our greatest opportunity.
Thank you, Gunhild. So I think one of the issues that we see, and just laying the foundation for this conversation, I know that Danny in the panel before discussed as well, but when we talk about a food system, we're talking about from farm to fork. So from everything from production and agriculture, which honestly we see a lot of conversation about that. But we don't always put it into context of the full food system: manufacturing, processing, transporting, and wasting food. And we know that 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from our food system, and we're not seeing adequate financing, or we're less than 4%, give or take, on global financing, and we need to shift that. So, Geeta, I'm going to turn it over to you. You know, sort of giving these staggering costs that we've been talking about, speak to us about what the World Bank works on food systems.
Thank you. First, real pleasure to be here, particularly with many of my heroes, and they've been, both are being very humble. They actually have moved the needle in a big way, and we are very lucky to have personalities like Gunhild and Hamid. I want to zoom out for a second and then zoom back into your question. I think this is a moment really to celebrate. I think the panel before us and Gunhild alluded to it. To have close to 150 countries, 75% of food production, and around 70% of emissions from the food sector is not trivial. And it's been a collective effort of almost the last, I would say, at least the last 3 or 4 years, where to lift the game on food systems transition and bring it to the same level as energy transition, but with very people-centric. Okay, so and I think this has been amazing, and it's really a collective triumph. Having said that, I think it is extremely disappointing to see the big disconnect between the heads of state and what their negotiators are doing. And I'll tell you why I say this. We talked about climate finance. Gunhild talked about it, and Ertharin threw the numbers, and Holly, you did too. On an average, $660 billion is climate finance per year. Around $25 billion a year has gone to agriculture and food, which is less than 4%. A sector that's emitting 30%, 1/3 of emissions, we're talking about scale of financing, 220 billion equated to the emissions, that's scale. But that cannot happen unless negotiators negotiate something. So effectively, they're coming in the way the sector is being financed. And I think this is not trivial, and this needs a major breakthrough. Or we go around it. And I think this is a big collective question, and more than advocacy, it needs action, because the countries have signed off, and the negotiators are in, I don't know which world they live in right now. So this is sort of the one part. I think you talked about the World Bank. The World Bank this is very high priority, the food systems transition. And in part, we've been very influenced by many around the world and many in this room. And that too has not been easy. But doesn't matter what the past is. The bottom line is this is high priority, this is centric. If we're talking about pandemic prevention, get the food systems right. The probability of next pandemic, like a COVID, is zoonotic in nature. The probability is over 65% within a decade. One of the biggest drivers, food systems, because it's facilitating wildlife to domestic animal to human transmission, right? So wherever one looks at, it's food systems. And within that, I think we did a big piece, we put the custodians for the thought piece on food finance architecture for the UN Food Summit. What we identified, and again, everybody's talked about this, a system that is bankrupting the planet. Gunhild talked about the violation of planetary boundaries and is creating unhealthy people. Every second person on this planet today is unhealthy. Okay, either no calories, wrong calories, or too much calories, and can still get close to 800 billion a year in public support. Means fundamentally the way we are financing this has to change. Second is consumer spending on food is about 12 to 15% of global GDP, which is about 100 trillion. So 12 to 15% of $12 to $15 trillion is being spent on food. How do we change behaviors there in a way that there's a demand side? And those are all the elements that we've been working on. But for us, most fundamentally, is to repurpose public support to agriculture before we can do anything else. And the declaration even talks about it. They don't say repurpose, they say revisit. Great. But they have it explicitly. That's good enough. And heads of state have signed off. So let me stop there.
Well, thank you so much, Geeta. Hamid, I want to bring you into the conversation here. You worked in the finance ministry of Oman. Now you're advising Rwanda on how to improve investment conditions using an innovative collaborative funding model. Talk to us a little bit about this model. We've been setting up the scene really for you to get into the nitty-gritty for us of what did that model look like a little bit, and then I'm going to then follow up with sort of some of your key takeaways that you've learned that we can then start to move forward with.
Right. Thank you very much. I must give credit to GFFN, Gunhild, and all the partners, and my friend Geeta, who was the first person who recognized the value of innovative collaborative funding model. She kept on encouraging me from the very day one. Innovative collaborative model really based on asset monetization of the government. And this is where Ministry of Finance in Oman, I was the advisor to the Minister of Finance, or the advisor, there are many advisors, but the advisor. And basically when the fiscal crisis came to the oil exporting countries, one of the things we were looking at, oh my God, how are we going to sort of mitigate the government debt to GDP ratio? So if you go to IMF when they do the Article 4 consultation document, or if you go to the sovereign ratings, they look at government debts and they downgrade you. Okay, so what I came up with the model was that why do we have to have all these debts on government balance sheet? Why don't we monetize into a commercial entity? So when we took away the debts from the government balance sheet, our rating improved. So having understood the importance of asset monetization from fiscal point of view, it was no-brainer. So then when I came into GFFN and we had many sort of round of validations and we went through many things, innovative collaborative model, really what it is all about is in the very early stage, I discovered that agriculture is a holy grail. Risk, risk, risk. The development banks were telling me, We don't have technology to go there. We can really, farmers are too small, you know, we can't get there. The ticket size is very, very little. So I said, oh my God, that's quite interesting. How do we solve that? So this is where, you know, one of the de-risking factor is that, and I'll give you a very practical example, which is what Rwanda is doing. There are many, many. Is one, you know, in Rwanda and in Africa in general, 40% of the food is wasted. So if somebody is growing 100 bananas, right, they are getting the realized value is only 60 bananas. That's affecting the accessibility and affordability of nutritious food. That is translating into child stunting and all those kind of things, which in itself then turns into, if you are a cap of fiscal expert and you go to the government finance minister and say to them, do you know you've lost productivity here because your children are not malnourished? Then you go to the businesses and you say, all this unhealthy diet that Gunhild, and I really salute Eat Lancet, because this is from where I basically learned what was the true cost in terms of health and climate. So let me give you the country that we are sitting today, Dubai, okay? They are basically sort of into fossil fuels and all those kind of things. But if you go into UK, straight away, okay? And if you look at it, food waste in UK and the climate impact of the unhealthy diet, Eat Lancet study, Professor Marco Springman sort of comes up and gives you a pound-dollar value. You know how much it is? 55 billion in UK, okay? 35 billion in food waste, 25 billion in health costs. Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, who stayed only 19 days and could not sort of last for more than a lettuce would last, lost her prime ministry for only 19 billion. So this is what Megan was talking from FAIRR, you know, the narrative. So the innovative model basically makes the finance minister understand what is the true cost. Man, 55 billion, and you're not addressing. Forget what you said. World Bank has done a phenomenal study on land degradation. You know, they are talking about it's 14% of the GDP. So if I was to take Geeta saying 100 trillion, you're talking about 14 trillion. Chatham House has done a phenomenal study for the businesses. What they're saying that, you know, obesity is losing businesses something in the region between 180 to 300 billion. So this is what having convinced the finance ministries that this makes sense, then it's easy. So what the innovative collaborative model does is that Rwanda, 40% of the food is wasted. Why it is wasted? A lot of it is wasted because of the cold storage system. So they have warehouses, but they do not have proper cold storage system. So what we did was, what we are doing at the moment, okay, and I'm happy to say we have a positive results. So what has happened is the Agaciro Development Fund of Rwanda, which is a sovereign wealth fund of Rwanda, is basically tied up with USAID, okay, and have adopted the innovative collaborative funding model. So these warehouses from the government will be transferred to Agaciro. Agaciro will put these warehouses as an equity investment, significant de-risking, Geeta. No capital, not a single dollar value check written. Once those are there as an investment entity you put in, then CNFI has committed something for in Hinga Wunguki, which means Feeding Future Rwanda project. They've committed $29 million, but what they've committed is co-investments, you know, dollar to dollar, you know, so when those warehouses are coming, cash will come from Hinga Wunguki, but more important, the technical expertise. Cash is, believe me, you can get it, I mean, but it's the technical expertise, which in my world of finance is a working capital finance. A lot of the businesses lose because we do not manage working capital finance. So that's, again, Geeta, significantly, because I've got a best partner with a technical expertise, putting his dollar government fiscal is not impacted at all. Sir, forget the savings that I've mentioned, right? I'm saying that you don't even have to invest in it. And the third partner, which is, luckily because I'm doing the state company transformation in Rwanda for Agaciro Development Fund, guess Agaciro Development Fund, where they own the biggest share, Rwanda Development Bank. So I met the CEO and I say to the World Bank is giving you, Geeta is giving you at 0% finance. Why are you charging 16% to agriculture? That doesn't make sense. There's all this exciting story. So I said, okay, if I come up with innovative collaborative fund model, where the government is not writing a single check, asset is monetized. Basically, I got USAID, the technical partners coming, how can they say, there are some people whom we can give between 0 to 10%. Significantly, Geeta risk from 16%, that goes on to whatever. Now you just imagine, when you have this situation, say for example, one of the projects we will do in Agachiro, I'll pause very soon, but one of the project in Agachiro, you know, what we are doing is cassava flour. I think you're sitting here, gentlemen, people Hyderabad will tell you that cassava flour is a kind of a diet for poor people, but even Rwanda, in Africa, you eat cassava flour. Do you know that cassava flour, we were competing against traditional businesses, which we can't. We are now going to do fortification of cassava flour. Dollar to dollar, de-risk, okay? So just imagine if you have a 10 million project, government has given you the plan at zilch value. USAID is going to put dollar to dollar value. Development Bank is going to give you a 3%. Now, if you are a BlackRock or somebody, you will say, wow, I got government, I got the best technical expertise, they're going to come running. And this is what I noticed when I did the Innovative Collaborative Funding Model presentation to the African Investor Sovereign Wealth Funds, which were all the sovereign wealth funds of Africa. I'm not joking. I'm telling you the truth. So many people came and said, Hamid, how can we put this? And we are ready to invest even in Rwanda. Please just tell us that this project, when it comes in on warehouses, so you get private capital. I wouldn't mention innovation because of the time.
So thank you so much. There's so many ways we could take that conversation. So Gunhild, I'm going to bring it to you because Hamid was talking about many different areas, from health, health impact to climate impact. And I really want to hear from your perspective. Health is a big motivator for EAT's work. And health impacts and costs linked to food systems are a part of what we're talking about fixing. So I really want to hear now, how do you see the good food finance, framework, network, facility, how is this a strategy to help achieve the health and climate outcomes that we so readily need to take care of?
So just let me start with why we started the Good Food Finance Network with partners and immense support from Geeta and the bank. The food finance lever that was part of the UN Food Systems Summit process was one important entry point and inspiration, but it was also the acknowledgements that if we are to get things moving with the time we have available, which is roughly a decade, we really need to get finance to move. And as we have heard, the current incentives are so misaligned with the outcomes we not only want to see, but have to see if we are to secure a viable future for humanity. And how do we do this? How do we really develop the financial innovations and collaborations that are needed to blend different pools of finance? And to your point, Holly, whether health is an important part, absolutely. This is one of the key messages coming out of the Food Systems Economics Commission report, that over half, actually 70% of the socioeconomic co-benefits by shifting, or is from shifting diets to healthy and sustainable diets. And obviously that is what is now bugging down health budgets and is absolutely unsustainable. Countries like China and the UK have already flagged concerns that their healthcare systems might collapse because they can't afford to treat and spend billions of dollars on treating totally preventable disease. So this is an absolute essential ingredient in what the Good Food Finance Network is all about. And what we call good food finance is really finance that delivers the outcomes we need to see. Carbon is easy. People will say, no, it's so not easy, but it's so much easier. And companies and investors are starting to, they're disclosing risks on climate. Now we have a TNFD for nature. Food systems are not really integrated into the disclosing systems we have, and they're for sure not thinking about nitrogen and phosphorus flows or land use and ocean acidification, whatever it is on the planetary boundary side. And then the health and nutrition side is really often ignored, and that is why we are so excited that Greg, and the Access to Nutrition Index is part of the Good Food Finance Network, bringing in that immensely important work they are doing. And what Hamid was talking about, this innovative collaborative model at the country level, obviously that is very much where the magic happens. But one key priority area, and something that the Good Food Finance Network is trying now to get off the ground, is what we call the Good Food Finance Facility. And that finance facility is not another new fund. Don't worry. People are like, no, we don't want any more funds. But it's not another fund. It's rather a connective tissue to allow existing funds and existing facilities to connect that with new financing across all relevant streams, so public, private, philanthropic. And on climate finance, we know the numbers going into food is 2%, although food is 1/3 of the problem and an even bigger part of the solution. And in terms of philanthropy spending, 2% of philanthropy goes to climate mitigation, and just a few percentage of that goes to food. So it's a complete misalignment. Where are we investing? And obviously private investors see this as very risky. So that is why we believe a connective tissue, a co-investment platform was the working title. Now we call it a facility. And it's basically doing a few things. One is to pool different sources of capital, as I mentioned. And then it's to connect this capital to co-investment opportunities, structured in a way that really lower the risk for investors and also provide built-in returns. And then it's also one of the roles that this facility will play is to provide seed capital and fill critical gaps to support marginal actors needing better resources and incentives. And then the final piece of the facility is to backstop these good food finance flows with what we call a 2-point accountability system, which is one important piece for EAT and UNDP now have just signed an MOU on developing a good food finance investment framework or guidelines to translate the science and the framework that EAT Lancet 2 will come out with, and translate that and align this with the SDG impact standards and other widely applied standards to really create consistency and easier cross-referencing. And then the final piece, which is something that investors have told us along the way when consultants or consultations have been held, is around integrated data systems. Because right now you have data all over the place. Health, nutrition is over here, then you have earth systems, climate data here, and then there is no way of linking this to financial data. So this is really a very innovative initiative to build an integrated data platform to allow for multi-dimensional performance insights to both financial and also non-financial players. So we are very excited about this, but we really need support and we need to work together to get this off the ground. We have the GEF, Global Environmental Facility, and the Green Climate Fund. They have been closely at the table and are very excited about this. And we are also in dialogue with many big finance players, but we really need further support to get this off the ground. And the ambition is to have it launched next year. But this is a little teaser.
So thank you so much, Gunhild. So I'm going to bring Geeta. I want you to come speak into these issues. We're seeing more debt distress, right? We're seeing polycrises everywhere all the time now. And talk to us about how can we scale up finance for national food system transformation efforts while also improving the risky fiscal situation.
Thank you. I want to, my point of departure where Gunhild left. One is, I think this good food finance facility is a must. And I think the entire fiscal landscape on food is so fragmented. Whether Gunhild talked about philanthropy, public, private, doesn't matter what you touch. And somehow we all need to converge and move in the same direction rather than duplicating efforts, right? So we say collaborations, but we are really duplicating, frankly. And so something has to change, and I think this is a facility, just by showing the mirror to us, is going to do it in a big way. Holly, the numbers that are thrown around in terms of food systems transformation is anything between 300 to 400 billion a year for the next decade. No one institution can do this. So clearly, private finance needs to move in. Private finance, that's, you know, if you walk around Wall Street and you ask these guys, these big names, what are you thinking about? They're throwing out numbers like 250 billion a year for climate for the next 8 years, and you say, okay, but where? Energy. So food is not on their, has not been on their radar. Again, the facility that Gunhild talked about is so important because, okay, fine, it's a risky proposition. They say, well, adaptation, bankable, big programs, what do we do? MRVs are not there, so how do we provide incentives to farmers, et cetera, Leave adaptation out. Let's go for mitigation then. Okay, that's a big enough agenda. Low emission rice, sustainable livestock, addressing losses and waste in agro-logistics. We are looking at bottom lines from anything from 20 billion to 40 billion if you take these big themes. So something, and then the de-risking part, I think is exactly right. I think the fault has also been on our side. We've not to date calibrated risk in a way that we can monetize it and say, okay, for every 100 million you put in, what's the risk? What is it you need? 20 billion? Fine, we'll figure it out. So I think there's a big onus on us as well in really getting this modeling right. And the food systems we haven't done. So that's sort of one big thing that I want to talk about in terms of how to scale up. I think the second is, of course, climate finance that I already talked about. Gunhild, when she said 2% is exactly right. This is one distortion, is climate finance not coming in. The other is Africa talks about huge adaptation needs, right? Now the breakdown in climate finance between mitigation and adaptation is 90-10. There needs to be a serious rebalancing of this number too, or this percentage, because the needs on adaptation are very high as well. So that's the second. The third is, to date, the biggest expenditure, the biggest financiers of food systems is domestic financing, which is public, okay? And so we talk about repurposing because 65% of it is distortive, 35 cents for every dollar is going to the farmer. But I think the more important is World Benchmarking Alliance came out with a report on how the top 250 companies are doing in the food sector. And the results are very sobering on the ESG standards. Less than 10% of it have climate disclosures, okay? Living income, living wages, less than 8%. So I think we almost need like a national compact that if national governments agree to repurpose, can they demand a higher ESG standards from the private sector? That itself is going to unleash a very different kind of a lifestyle, monetary lifestyle. Last 2 points. You talked about debt. I would argue debt and food security swaps is better than debt and environment because of the permanency argument. It hasn't happened. It will happen. We need to get on it. This is again a call for action. And that's because the biggest culprit, a hostage to the food systems or lack of are children, which is direct impact on wasting, stunting human capital. And to have a debt for food security swaps actually will have a huge positive permanent impact, and therefore is more important in my view than debt for environment, and yet has environmental benefits. The second is, and Gunhild and I have talked about this often, is poverty lines. We're talking about $2.16 of a poverty line. A healthy diet doesn't matter on the cultural sensitivity, socio-political, all kinds of sensitivity on an average is $4 to $5. so what we are asking the world to eat, they can't afford it. So we have to revisit the poverty lines and reduce this disconnect, which means the social protection or the income support programs need to move from caloric sufficiency into nutrition sufficiency, right? So those are 3 or 4 levers, I think, where collectively we can get some actions. Let me stop there.
Thank you. So when we're looking at this good food financing facility of the future, right, it's really to create a healthy, climate resilient, inclusive food system. So Hamid, I really want to hear from you now, thinking about, let's just imagine here is the financing facility is in place. What should we be looking at as far as when we look at the good food finance facility and it starts its initial operations, providing readiness support and delivering the first seed capital, just imagine, right? What is the key insights that we need to be thinking about from the public and private sector that we need to be considering as we move forward?
Collaboration. I mean, and also really creating narratives, right narratives. So far, I mean, I don't know, but when I joined GFFN and started, there was not a single attempt on Ministry of Finance at a level that innovative collaborative funding model goes. Because it at the heart tells. So when I was sitting with the Rwandan finance ministries and I said to them that soil degradation is going to cost you several $billion if you don't adopt, sustainable agriculture form. Land degradation. So I think that knowledge and a narrative that they understand. Do you know what I mean? Farming is very, very, very informal, okay? But banking is very regulated. So how do you bring the marriage together? I think that's where the narrative comes into it. And in terms of good food finance facility, one of the work stream that I am really, really excited about is country readiness. Because having been successful at Agaciro, where Rwanda and basically USAID have signed an MOU. It's a public knowledge, okay, where they're going to reduce the waste of the country. By the way, when you reduce the waste of the country, you are also reducing the carbon emission. And if you really look at it, because that much amount of land and the process is used, 40%, could you believe it? 21% of Rwanda is basically, land is used, which, and if you have been to, it's called Thousand Hills, okay? So basically it's very difficult land to agriculture, for agriculture, and they're losing 21%, just wasting it. In the UK, the food waste, how much of the food waste, farm gate waste is about nearly 3 million tons, which can feed 6 million people, 3 meals, 6 million people, and the area which is sort of used for production that they are losing, is the size of half of the Wales as a country, and how much carbon emissions are coming out of that. So I think it's the narrative that we need to change, and I really feel once you work together, but not just, I'm sorry, I mean, adequacy is very important. But to the investors, they want to know what do I get out of it in returns. And here, if you look at it, it takes everything. So as I explained to you, you have de-risked in a way. So you de-risk, so you get the investors in. They bring their own discipline. Okay, FAIRR initiative, we got about sort of 80 trillion under it. Let's help them how to do that, okay? And what I'm excited about GFFN is the country readiness program, because we will be able to replicate what has happened in Rwanda. Because unfortunately, whenever I went there, where is the test case? Where is the test case? And I said, believe in me, I'm an intellectual guy, man. We can do that, But no, everybody wants test case.
So I'm going to jump on in, and we have just less than 5 minutes right now, and here we are at COP. Tomorrow's a Food and Ag Day, and then the COP will be closing. So I really want to hear from each one of you, lightning speed to be clear. Looking at here we are at COP, where do we go next? Like, what have we succeeded here, which we have had so many successes, especially when you compare it to the last several years. Food has definitely been on the agenda. We've have over 50 sessions. Countries have signed on to declarations. Non-state partners have signed on declarations. So I'm going to start with you, Gunhild, and go down the road real quickly of so what's next since we've been here at COP?
Show us the money and set targets. That's part of the problem with the declaration. Obviously, it recognizes the importance, but it's still, countries don't really know what they have signed up for. And putting food systems thinking into their NDCs and their NAPs, etc. That's not going to change the world. It has to be measurable, smart targets based on science, and it has to translate also into funding, especially from Global North, to actually make this transition happening. And Geeta mentioned the estimates for what this will actually cost up front. There are from 300 to 400 billion a year, 200 to 500 billion is the estimates that the Food Systems Economics Commission...
We're going to keep this really short
Oh,
here,
sorry.
Danielle, so we're going to go right over to
Okay,
Geeta.
sorry. No, so then it's all about now translating this into action, but also ramping up ambitions, because we are still on track to 2.7 degrees, and it's not enough what has happened here, even the High Ambition Coalition that comes or will be announced tomorrow. So we really need to get to work and also start putting our money where the science is and start measuring what matters.
All right, Geeta, 30 seconds.
Thank you. No, I will do literally 30 seconds. First, if I was a COP presidency, I would forget about everything and just focus the entire year only on negotiators. So that's the first thing. I think the second is carbon pricing. We cannot afford to get the world to do the right things at $5 a ton. Give me a break. Okay? So those are the two big things.
Great. Hamid?
Yeah, for like funding, the innovative collaborative funding model, monetize the assets. So if you wanted 100 billion, you can really get 30 billion by just monetizing the assets. The donors are ready. Gee, when you look at the, I was doing a global I was at the annual assembly. Okay, donors are worried because of the risk. The moment they see the risk has been mitigated, as I explained repeatedly, they're going to come back. And in my model, innovative collaborative model, donors, because it's an investment you make in an entity. This is a commercial entity. So once the commercial entity started making money, donor get their money back. So this innovative collaborative funding model enables them a self-financing. So I really think that the more we create and focus on finance ministries, I think you're going to get a lot of sort of leverage that, okay, don't worry about that 100 billion. Let's create our 100 billion ourselves.
Great, thank you. So to conclude here, just to wrap it up, we have talked about the need of good food financing, what's at risk if we do nothing, what we need to do to get there. We've talked about the need and necessity for the partnerships in a collaborative model, and we continuing to accelerate. I mean, I think one of the issues is that we're seeing small incremental changes, and now we need to accelerate and mainstream, and we're really hoping that this good food financing facility and all the partners is to help accelerate this model. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank
Great
you.
moderation as always. She's a rock star. Can we have